I want to talk about two things. My recent reading slump and what pulled me out of it. Just recently, my friend Rick tweeted about how we should all just admit that reading slump is code for depression. And I can't disagree with that. But I can't get into reading slumps. Reading is my job, kind of. I run a blog full-time, and this YouTube channel is supplementary to that blog. I'm also a freelance writer on the side, but everything I do pretty much revolves around travel and literature. And so I have to constantly be reading. I receive review copies all of the time, and the publishers that send them to me are good, kind people. Usually they are indie presses who put a lot of faith in me to report on these excellent books from all around the world by queer writers, writers of colour, etc., and I want to give them attention, and I love what I do. That means, however, that I can't really get into a reading slump. I can't afford to. I have to read all of the time. And a reading slump is usually just a period where you don't have the mental, physical, emotional strength to be reading for pleasure because your mind isn't there. And again, to reference Rick's tweet, this usually is because of depression for a lot of us. For me, I think it was the stress of a bunch of things. I get stressed very easily. That's why I no longer have a 9-to-5 job. That's why I quit teaching. I'm not good with stress. I'm not good with authority figures either. Point is, I don't do well with stress and anxiety, and I am susceptible to depression. So when I enter a reading slump, all I have to do is keep reading, do my best to find love, appreciation, and enthusiasm for the books that I'm reading and talking about, and hope that the slump will pass. But it does occasionally mean that I have to put aside review copies, put aside things that I have been charged with reading, and instead I have to read something that I hope will push me out of the slump. And I think for so many of us, this is not a new perspective, this is not a new angle. A lot of us need escapism first and foremost. And I recently did a video on the power of escapism. So I followed my own advice and I went in search of a new science fiction series that I hoped would get me out of the slump. I had my eye on the works of Becky Chambers. I had been excited to read her for a long time. I was in the mood for some science fiction, and so I picked up The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I hoped that this would get me out of my reading slump, and it did. Again, my slump didn't look like other people's slumps. I was still reading like 2 books a week for work, but I wasn't really enjoying them. I could see the merit in them, objectively, therefore I could review them, but I wasn't feeling emotionally attached and excited the way that I should. But I did with this. I put down my review copies, I put down my work, and I read this and allowed the book to wash over me. The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet was exactly what I needed, and I really want to talk about how great this book is. Now, this was Becky Chambers' debut novel, and it's the first in a series of 4. The 4th one just came out in hardcover, and I've already picked up the 2nd one, and I can't wait to read it, obviously. But I want to talk first about my relationship to science fiction, the kind of science fiction that I typically like, and why this fits that niche so well. My favourite kind of science fiction, and I hadn't really thought about that until now, isn't really the intense literary kind that takes real-world issues and explores them. You know, topics of climate change and overpopulation and eugenics and certain political and religious issues. These things all get explored in very, very clever science fiction, but it's not always my favourite type. My favourite type of science fiction is the more escapist type, that is closer to fantasy, and sometimes just is fantasy, but in space. And what I love most about this type is the found family dynamic. So much great science fiction, or fantasy science fiction, whatever you want to call it, has this found family dynamic where you have a ragtag group of people who all come from different walks of life and all have very different skills, personalities, ages, backgrounds, races, colours, whatever. And they all smush themselves together into a closed and confined space and go on adventures. Star Wars is an obvious example. So is Firefly. So is Cowboy Bebop. So is even Pirates of the Caribbean, and that's my favourite movie. A lot of these great fantasy and science fiction stories have that atmosphere to them. One of my favourite fantasy series in the whole wide world, and again, to reference my friend Rick, I know that he loves this series as well, and I've never met anyone else who has, so if you have, please let me know in the comments. It is The Tales of the Ketty J by Chris Wooding, which begins with the book Retribution Falls. This is a series of 4 steampunk sci-fi fantasy things, and they are some of my favourite books ever. They are my absolute favourite fantasy series, and they are again a found family, Firefly, Star Wars, Cowboy Bebop style. You've got an airship, you've got a bunch of people who are variations of good and bad, who all come from different places with different backgrounds and stories to explore. The Tales of the Ketty J is flawless. I love this series so much. Please get it and read it if you haven't and you're a fan of fantasy, science fiction, and everything I'm talking about here. And of course, I've always wanted something to fill that Ketty J void, and I got it with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Becky Chambers is a fantastic writer of science fiction, but she's also a fantastic writer of characters and stories and family dynamics. I've said found family a few times, and what I mean is people who are forging their own family out of the people around them. I am a huge fan of this. I love my friends. I love making friends. I'm a very sociable kind of introvert. I love meeting people. I love making friends, and I get very attached to them. I need people around me. I need people in my life, people I can count on and who can count on me. And so I really adore this found family dynamic. It's really important to me. And The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet begins straight off the bat with a girl called Rosemary who is about to find her found family. The book is set a few hundred years into humanity's future, and there are 2 groups of humans. There are those that live on Mars. Mars has been terraformed and is now our new home. And then there's the group that left. They left on an ark. They left on a caravan of ships. They sailed out into the cosmos to escape Earth and forge a new path into the oblivion. And that group eventually got picked up by an alien race, a council of alien races called the Galactic Council, who are very similar to the council of different races in the Mass Effect video games. Mass Effect is another example of found family, actually. It's a really good series of video games, and my partner has been playing them for the first time recently, and watching her play them has been lovely. Mass Effect is very military, though, and this is not, thankfully. I'm not actually a big fan of the military aspect of spacefaring science fiction. Instead, this is a group of people who work on a ship that is a kind of space mining vessel, but it's not mining asteroids and rocks, it's mining space itself. It punches holes into space to create wormholes that make travel around the universe easier. That's their job. The crew is made up of people who come from 2 different types of humanity, the Mars living and the spacefaring type. The captain of the ship, Ashby, is born on a ship out in this flotilla of human escapees, and he's never known planetary life, really. He's always existed in these metal ships floating in the void. Rosemary, however, has just come from Mars, and she has a strange and mysterious backstory that gets explored as the book goes on, and eventually around the midpoint you get the big twist of who she is and where she really comes from. And there are a few other humans on board as well, but this is a found family made up of people from various different races. And the different races in the universe that Becky Chambers has created here are some of the most fascinating things in science fiction for me. To reference Mass Effect again, one of the coolest things about those games is how well the different races in that universe have been designed. Their religions, their biologies, their culture and history, their beliefs, their ethics and morals, even their social interactions, they're all pretty interesting, some more than others. And again here, in The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, you've got that again. You've got a collection of different races from different planets, each of which is really interesting. My favourite character on the ship is a woman called Sissix, and she is of a race that resembles the cold-blooded lizards of Earth. And what I love so much about her race is that they don't interact and have social relationships in the same way that humans do. I guess, to use our terms, they are polyamorous, they have open relationships, they don't view romance sex and human relationships in the same rigid ways that we do. They couple with each other in public. They share intimacies. They have big orgies. They celebrate love and intimacy, and it's really touching. And I found Sissix to be the character that I clung on to the most as the book went on. You've also got a race that are basically just big blobs, and they at one point were the most powerful race in the galaxy. They were the ones that first did the space travel thing and started spreading across the galaxy like a virus. They're so interesting because they don't have any physical strength. They don't have bones. They're big jellyfish blobs, but they have incredible intellect, and they use that intellect to get themselves ahead in the kind of galaxy space race, if you like. On the Wayfarer, which is the name of the ship, and also the series as a whole, the Wayfarer series, there is a guy called Dr. Chef, because he is the ship's doctor and the ship's chef. And he is this big caterpillar thing. He has 6 legs that also work sometimes as arms. He can walk on 2 or 4 or 6, I guess. He's of a fascinating race that have slowly gone extinct, and you find out the background of that as the book goes on. He is a loving and sweet and caring thing, and his biology has this weird voice box thing where he has like 20 different voice boxes that all talk and mangle and overlap over each other to create their language. The galaxy has a standard language that they all speak, and for him it's quite difficult to speak that language, and he tries to explain his name and his language to Rosemary when she first meets him, because she hasn't come in contact with many other alien creatures, having lived on Mars for most of her life. These characters are absolutely touching. Very, very early on, you meet a human who's this really pale, pathetic, very annoying weasel of a man who works in the engines. The fuel that they use is mushrooms, and they have this fantastic fungal fuel system that is explored in as much detail as it needs to be explored. And he's an awful, awful guy. But even him, towards the end of the book, gets a story arc that justifies him and makes him humanized in our eyes. There's also an AI, and the AI of the ship, as it goes on, has a very, very prominent role. So I've talked a lot about the races and different people, and that's really what's key here, is this found family dynamic. But also, this is basically a TV show. I haven't talked about the story. All I've said is that Rosemary comes from Mars and she has ended up working on the Wayfarer as their clerk. They all have different roles to play, and they punch holes in space to create wormholes. They go out, they travel for months and months and months. They arrive at a place, they punch a hole, and they use that hole to get back quickly. And now that hole exists as a new intergalactic highway, I guess. That's their whole job. Very early on, Ashby, the captain, is tipped off by someone. Something political is about to happen. And you find out very quickly that that thing is that a new race who people know about, who live in clusters around the center of the galaxy, they want to join the Galactic Council. They want to basically join the union of different races. And people have opinions on this, and you can see the real-world political connections here. But this gives the Wayfarer crew an opportunity for work, and they go to seek that work. And on the way there, and it's going to take them a long time to get there, they have a lot of journeys and adventures, and things happen and things go wrong. It's episodic. They have an overarching goal to get to, but that goal isn't really important. It's what happens along the way. Every chapter is pretty long, and every chapter is an episode of a TV show. You can really see this 400-ish page book as a series of a show. This is one season with multiple episodes. Each episode has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I thought that that was so clever. Each episode kind of focuses on a different character. They might go to a different planet. Every episode expands the world and the lore and the backgrounds and the people, and focuses on a specific person and what they're going through. It's absolutely brilliantly done. It's very, very true to a TV show, and that gives it a real golden age sci-fi kind of a feel to it. There isn't a single thing about this novel that I dislike. I was emphatically in love with everything that makes this up. The writing, the world building, the characters, their relationships, and the way that it was episodically structured. It's perfect for me. This is exactly the kind of very clever escapism. What just fell off? This is the exact kind of escapism that I needed to get me out of a reading slump. A book that was all about love and relationships and interpersonal connections, that is full of witty dialogue and people teaching each other about themselves in order to become closer and experience the world in a greater capacity. It's clever. It's really, really clever world building and character writing. This is a very, very fleshed out and real, substantial place that we're exploring. Becky Chambers has masterfully crafted the cultures and races and politics and religions and even biology and geology and geography and history of all of these places and peoples and cultures in this new future world that she has devised. It's amazing what she has built here, but world building alone does not get us to care about a story. What gets us to care is the characters, and it's the characters that will make or break everything, and it's the characters in The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet that really sell this to you. You will love and care about every single member of the Wayfarer. I adored this so, so much. I did bring this book up in a recent wrap-up, and in that I said that I don't like to be hyperbolic and call a new book that I just read a new favourite, but it is a new favourite of mine. I cherish this book because it has helped me reappreciate literature as I was slowly forgetting. It got me out of a reading slump, and if you've been in a reading slump and gotten out of one, you often cherish the book that did it, and this is the book that did it. I needed this book in my life. I love it. I'm so happy that I've got the sequel. I'm so happy that Becky Chambers is churning out incredible science fiction / fantasy stories. This is what I needed, and if you want great science fiction and if you want great escapism, you need to read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet and subscribe to this channel for books.